I'm Mary Hunt at WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual, and it is our privilege this afternoon to have with us the Reverend Dr. Teresa Smallwood, who has written a book that I'm excited about, and I hope you will be too. It is called Public Theology and Violent Rhetoric, Examined in a Queer, Womanist, Critical Ethnography. And it is published by T&T Clark, has a beautiful cover that is has a faint resemblance of the many tulip gardens in the Netherlands, but this one looks to be one of the main ones, maybe Kirchenhof or one of those. Is that what it is? Yeah. And it's wonderful to have Teresa with us to talk about this book, and I think we will all come away from the hour with both renewed information about the topic, but I hope also renewed commitment. I am here with Diane New, the other co-director at WATER. Emily, you haven't seen Diane in a while, so that's a wonderful reconnection for you two. And also, we are with our new WATER intern this year, Vera Lugosi from Fort Worth, Texas, who is part of the Brethren Voluntary Service Program. Vera, you might want to give a wave. And she follows in the long tradition of wonderful WATER interns. And she is every inch of it and doing a marvelous job already. We are very, very pleased with her being with us. We're very indebted to her already for some terrific IT work and just generally having a great new colleague. That's one of my favorite things in this work, is to have a new colleague who I can look at and say, this person's going to go a long ways, and whatever we can do to help, it's only going to be a little bit of help, because this person's going on her own sky high, and that's you, Vera. So I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased to have you with us, and so grateful and glad that you're meeting good WATER people while you're here. And it'll be a year-long program, and Vera came to us after having been an intern with the Sisters of Notre Dame in Boston through an AmeriCorps program, and of course AmeriCorps funding was cut. We won't mention why. And now their loss is our gain, and she is at WATER for a year, as I mentioned, through the Brethren. So this is delightful for all of us. I will welcome Dr. Smallwood properly when I introduce her in a moment, but I would like to begin, as we always do at WATER, with a land acknowledgement. This is something that we have incorporated into our programs to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we need to do more of, given the systemic injustice Indigenous and other people of color face in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end, a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making anew. With the U.S. Thanksgiving coming up, it is an especially important time to create justice. We at WATER are on Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, that is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and the injustice toward Indigenous people and other people of color that is so deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and make reparations for the genocide involved. WATER's work, whether intellectual, spiritual, or liturgical, is aimed to bring about social justice. I invite you just to take a quiet moment to think of the Native people on whose land you sit. And if you wish, and Carrie has already done so, feel free to put their names in the chat as a way of expressing our gratitude to them and our indebtedness. Let's take just a moment. Thank you. Our work at WATER brings feminist, womanist, spiritual values and intellectual work to efforts for social change. Our hope is that by socializing the resources of this work in religion, we spread tools and energy for justice. In light of the current U.S. administration's disruptive, destructive, chaotic, and globe-shaking policies, it is more crucial than ever that we create opportunities like this for learning, conversation, and resistance. You can be sure that WATER will protect these spaces and expand them in the months ahead, come what may. Feel free to join us and to suggest other topics and speakers, books, and ideas we might fruitfully explore. The stakes are higher than I have experienced in my lifetime, and they seem to get higher by the day, with so many issues largely brushed under the rug as the list of horrors grows, especially for those who are poor. WATER will stand regardless. Let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Smallwood, and her book, and then she will explore for us, maybe for 20, 25 minutes, some of the ideas that she raises in this volume. And then we'll open the floor for questions and discussion until about the top of the hour or 2 o'clock here on the East Coast of the US, when we will close officially. The Zoom will remain open for conversation as long as people wish after that. Please listen and enjoy. We will take notes, which will be on our website shortly, along with the video of this session. You can re-listen by going to WATER's website at www.waterwomensalliance.org and look under Programs and Teleconferences, and you will find this video with Dr. Smallwood, as well as some notes that we will take and comments that we will make about it. Those will also be sent to people by email who have registered for this event. So feel free to share these resources to continue this important conversation among your colleagues, and above all, to begin to take seriously the extent to which violent rhetoric has to be eradicated from Christian pulpits. Bottom line takeaway for the day. Welcome to you, my friend Teresa Smallwood. We have been acquainted for a number of years, having served together on the American Academy of Religion LGBTIQ committee. I'm delighted to have you lay out your very useful research today in public theology. Dr. Smallwood is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She has a Master of Divinity from Howard University Divinity School. She trained as an attorney at North Carolina Central University and spent 2 decades in the practice of law. She went on to do a PhD in theology, ethics, and human sciences at Chicago Theological Seminary. Let me read just a snippet of her biography. Dr. Smallwood served as a postdoctoral fellow and associate director of the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaboration at Vanderbilt Divinity School before moving to United Lutheran Seminary, where she is now the vice president and dean. She's also an adjunct professor at Lancaster Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. She's a frequent contributor to the Religious Freedom Center in Washington, D.C., and she formerly worked for Legal Services of the Southern Piedmont in Charlotte, North Carolina, as a staff attorney for the Children's Law Center. Dr. Smallwood is licensed and ordained to the public ministry, was licensed and ordained to the public ministry while serving Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church in Lewiston, North Carolina, and she tells me she now has some ongoing conversation with the AME Church. So I think that she is not only eminently well qualified to speak about the topic, but she is a real mover and shaker currently in theological education and in the work of queer anti-racist work writ large. This book is a fascinating and above all useful study of the pernicious impact of violent rhetoric on the well-being of LGBTQ people. Some of Teresa's own story is woven into the analysis as she calls for an end to violent rhetoric in the bully pulpits of churches, especially Black churches, where some who preach do the dirty work of reinforcing white Christian hegemonic discrimination. This is a work of courage and compassion. It is a scholarly contribution to the field of public theology, and it is a wonderful example of the kind of work that can be made accessible, written clearly, unambiguously, with full citations and lots of data, but making no mistake that the message is clear. This is a book calling us to action. Teresa Smallwood, a warm water welcome to you, and come again and often.
Thank you so very much. And I cannot say it more passionately how much I feel honored to be here. There are many places I could have been invited to, but it is here that I feel the flow of true water, the kind of alliance that keeps me going. Because as we well know, particularly in this moment, this particular epoch of history, women are having a hard time. And we're being targeted in many, many ways. And so to have that kind of alliance that you know will be there, that you know will stand, means everything. You've given me the mic, and I am happy to take it to talk about the journey of this book. I was in my second career making myself a way out of no way, which is obviously a womanist concept. Because I was no longer a practicing attorney, there was a need to rebuild, to retool, to rewire myself. And I had gone through the first, I would say, 20 years of my professional life, not believing that a call on my life could ever be realized. Because the church that I loved, the church that nurtured me, the church through which I received my own spiritual formation, came to a place where it rejected me ontologically and ejected me as it related to my capacity to be a part of the grand spirit. As a result, it became really the work of my life to take it on. By the time I ended up in a PhD program and learned what it meant to do the work my soul must have, coming through the various volumes of womanist theology and ethics, womanist methodology, particularly Katie Geneva Cannon, I realized that my dissertation needed to be my coming out statement, literally. And so the work that my soul needed was to understand, first of all, the phenomenon of how it is that certain people are accepted in the sort of Christian container and others are not. How it is that one could actually grow up in a place, be nurtured by that place, and rejected at the same time. And more particularly, as I grew in my own experience as a lawyer and my own experience as someone with significant undergraduate training and going on to receive a professional degree, it became even more obscure for me, opaque even, how it is that you could experience so much love and so much hate in the same spot. And as I began to really formulate this particular manuscript, not as a book, but as a dissertation, I saw this as a necessary component to do it through ethnography, because I realized that until I can show this is not a phenomenon solely to me, singular to my experience, but one that in fact touches a lot of folk, if I didn't have that capacity to bring the empirical data, the data points that point to the fact that this is a phenomenology study, there was going to be a question about whether or not it had any real relevance. So I began, and if you've read any portion of the book, you know my method. I did a survey, which is what a lot of ethnographers start with. Completed the survey, and then from those folk who were attainable to me, created some individual interviews, and from those interviews, established a focus group. And then had them look together at the exemplar presentation of the pastor whose work we actually break down, do some deconstruction on, Pastor Anderson. And when it all came together, it was very clear to me that this is a true phenomenon, one that goes on and on and on throughout America. More particularly, I should say, it doesn't just start or stop with the Black community. There are many communities that have this same experience of people being in the pews and being talked at as though they are not human, being referred to as some kind of mistake that God made. And it occurred to me that until people have an opportunity to talk it through, even one of my ethnographic participants said, "I'm so glad you're giving me the opportunity to speak this. I've not had any other opportunity. There's been no chance for me to share this, because who am I going to share it with?" What I learned from this process, I have written obviously about but more particularly as I think about my own experience, my own lived experience, it became very important to get this work complete. And obviously, it took about 10 years for it to actually come to this point. But in that period of time, I learned a number of things that I hope to share with you. First and foremost, we must be capable of interrogating what it is we expose ourselves to. I grew up, actually, I was born into the Baptist faith. And so many would say I was born Baptist, bred Baptist, and I thought I would die Baptist. They say it in a funny way, but the bottom line is I realized Baptist people rejected me. By the time I finished my law degree, went back home to work, to take care of my mother who was ailing with Alzheimer's, my money was good in the church, but my ontology was not. And that created for me an existential crisis that really I had to confront. When it came time for me to be ordained, there was no problem because I was able to be a great tither. But what was problematic is if I chose to serve communion, then the response was, you're an abomination. And the abomination is the fact that you have claimed to be a lesbian. As a matter of fact, the pastor who totally trusted me to do this work was not even aware that his deacons were saying things like, I'm not taking communion from this person. And one of the deacons goes on to say at a later point that I document, you're nothing to God. Those kinds of interactions throughout my experience did violence. They did violence to me, to my mind, to my selfhood, to my personhood. And in such a way that at some point in my life, I completely divorced from the faith. It wasn't long lasting because not only did I grow up in the church grew up in me. I really believed the things I was taught. I truly believed that Jesus loves me. This I know. For the Bible tells me so. And now, because of my personal orientation to life, somehow that no longer applies. So I needed to work it out. I needed to construct my theology around the things that were my core beliefs. I believe strongly in the fact that I was created in the image of God. And if the Imago Dei cannot hold me, what human can it hold? If the Imago Dei, in any fashion you think of it, has a problem with certain individuals who were created by God, then what are we literally saying about God? I had to come to the grip of the notion that the mosaic that I now see as my God concept would not reject its own creation. And so then I had to figure out, well, how in the world did people get it wrong and I've got it right? Well, let's start from the beginning. We tell the Genesis myth. Over and over again, I learned, the word became flesh. But I also learned that God created Adam and Eve. And later it became an indictment, Adam and Eve, but not Adam and Steve. What does that mean? Let's look at the original language is what I decided. When we think in terms of the Adama, there was no real assessment of gender there. The Adama simply means a being. And in the original language, if God created a being, then I'm making the argument in this book that the separation is the first transition, surgery. The point I'm simply trying to make is, don't suggest to me that God made a mistake. God makes no mistakes. Be more open to the fact that God is a way bigger God than what you have put in your box. The next thing I learned is that there is something driving this need for violent rhetoric. What is it? It is somatophobia. Somatophobia is really the word that stands for the fear of flesh. The fear of flesh suggests to me that sameness has created an idolatry that causes people to believe, unless you're just like me, unless you do exactly as I do, unless your orientation is exactly homogeneous, then something's wrong and I need to fear you. And that fear shows up in the pulpit. That fear showed up when the Pulse nightclub massacre took place. It was a fear that was prevalent among people who suffer from somatophobia. One preacher, Pastor Jimenez, went on before his congregation and declared he was happy that, quote unquote, 50 pedophiles were killed. He was happy, he said, because Florida is a lot safer now. And this particular snippet that I talk about in the book helped me understand how far people will go with a very sadistic appreciation for the scriptures, and how that causes people to create their own off-ramps into an idolatrous understanding of the scriptures, such that they could then turn them on other human beings and exclude them, even though the gospel talks about the welcome of everyone to Christ's table. The other thing I learned in this process, and something that I hope I will be able to share with other generations for as long as I am in a teaching role, I learned that we need to identify when people are operating in bad theology. Bad theology has grown up to become a very vile and disruptive nationalist approach to Christianity. Now, I'm not so stupid as to think that Christianity is a monolith. I know it is not. I know that if I were to poll people in my church, we would come up with several different Christianities. But there are some universal truths that have been distorted to the point where now a very toxic, militaristic masculinity seems to have taken over in some parts of this American continent or North American continent. And in part, what I'm speaking of is the fact that from the point in time that we began to claim "In God We Trust" as a nation, from the point in time that we began to put those kinds of statements on our money, and after we began to realize how we could, through Charles Long's understanding of signification, how we could signify a particularized way of being, our continent, and particularly our nation, has literally deployed religion as a weapon. And we've used, in a lot of ways, stereotypical behaviors to define and to confine certain bodies, not just physical bodies, but bodies of evidence that then are used to corral people into certain places for control. So if you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, or ellipsis, if you will, you don't belong. And I understood after some serious talks with others who had experienced these things, I understood that what was taking place was an othering and a belonging. And because people are othered in our culture and not given an opportunity to belong, the capacity for you to grow up a preacher who can speak violent rhetoric week after week after week grows. And more particularly, what you find is that you develop disciples. Disciples of folk who will repeat those same terrible statements. As a matter of fact, they will repeat them and will act upon them to the point of violence. So it's not then just the rhetoric that's violent, but it's the behavior that comes from it. This is why we can very clearly see how so much truly tragic, and particularly as it relates to trans people, we've seen so much violence because what has grown up are folks with a narrative in their mouths that literally says that it's the gospel, that it is what God desires. As a matter of fact, it was the work of an imam who said death is the only real response we can give to LGBTQIA folk. And as a result, then, death is our compassion. Only when we kill them, only when we put them, in the case of the preacher out of North Carolina who says, I know how to solve the problem of gays. Put them all in an electrified fence. Don't feed them. Eventually, they will die out. And they will die out because they're not going to reproduce. That kind of thinking in a sacred space creates not only havoc, but it does great harm. Now, I've moved to people like Laurel Snyder and Stephen Ray to talk about how we cannot do harm, that is not the message of the gospel. And then I decided that this cannot just be an analysis of Christians. We also need to know that these same kinds of rhetorical violences happen in other communities, happen in other institutions of faith, and tried real hard to bring those to the fore as well. In the end, what this book does, and what I hope it stands for, is the ability to say there is a counter narrative. There is a resistance that can be established. And that I want people who are like me, who really feel they do belong, to have a model to speak from, to have an argument to project, and to literally reject the violent rhetoric. My thought about this has to do with being sure that my core beliefs are intact and that they are not doing harm to me. And then to be sure that I can literally discern the origin, the root cause, the root elements of those messages that would suggest I am a messed up person that God doesn't love. And then after that, I encourage people to find the practices that sustain them in their core beliefs. It might be burning sage in your home. It could be taking a special bath. It could mean simply the way you design your meditation time. But be sure that you understand what you believe and don't allow anybody's violent rhetoric to take that down. I want this book to be an encouragement to LGBTQ folk, but I also know it can be an encouragement to anyone in ministry. Because this message is about first exposing the place in which folks have gone on the off-ramp and are operating in idolatry. And at the same time, it corrects the message of who is and is not acceptable to God. In the end, what I was able to accomplish in this book gave me the courage to go on. I left my PhD program, joined up with Emily Towns, who is the author of Womanist Ethics and the Cultural Production of Evil. And there I was nurtured under the concepts of Antonio Gramsci, Charles Long, and of course, Emily herself, in understanding that what I have exposed here is exactly how culture produces this kind of evil, but more particularly, how through culture we can produce good. I'm very satisfied with the book, satisfied with people's reactions to it. And I think it's appropriate to say that I see the sequel being looking at the Pulse nightclub and thinking about what sanctuary might be for people. The other thing that I'm very interested in doing is connecting these stories to the stories of ancestral legacies that I'm aware of, such as people like Eliza Woods, whose body was riddled with bullets after having hung to death, been taken out of a jail cell and hung on the courthouse lawn there in, I think it was Jackson, Tennessee. I see the connectivity here because it really is a question of how violence follows the body. So you can look for those kinds of manuscripts from me down the road. I'm open to any questions you might have.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Teresa Smallwood, for this very provocative and poignant as well as powerful way of looking at the kind of violent rhetoric to which we have all been exposed. I want to say once again that this book, which Dr. Smallwood has been talking about, Public Theology and Violent Rhetoric, Examined in a Queer Womanist Critical Ethnography, is available from T&T Clark. It is, as Emily Towns says in one of the book blurbs, an exciting and challenging volume, a much needed voice. And we have heard it this afternoon, and we are in your debt. And I thank you on behalf of all of us, Teresa. You have laid it out with a clarity and power that is rare in this business for people kind of pussyfoot around to whether they might say something that might make somebody uncomfortable. But no, this is clear. This is part of the urgency of the moment, and you are meeting it in a way that is exemplary, and I appreciate it. Appreciate it, especially your being with us here today. I want to open the floor for discussion. It is our tradition to keep these comments as brief as we can and to get as many people involved as we can. So please feel welcome and encouraged to add your comments to the discussion today. I'm going to simply start us off by saying that this book made me realize, Teresa, how little has changed in so many churches in my lifetime. And I'm sure there are young people today who can tell your same story and my story. I
Mhm.
know there are in Catholic churches. And my question is, because you've said it so clearly, the place where you thought there was love, there's hate. The place where you thought there should be nurture, there's rejection. The places that you're talked about and not talked with. This goes on as we speak. And I just wonder how we assess the effectiveness of our work to date and what we might do differently to move ahead with greater speed, if you know what
Mhm.
I mean. None of us getting any younger, but that's just my takeaway, sort of top line takeaway is that what do we need to do to take your analysis radically seriously and take it up a notch in terms of what it is we need to do. Because I'm afraid, both with the ubiquity of guns in this country, that things could get, Pulse nightclub might not be such a unique event. And I'm also aware that with social media, the message that is framed and foisted upon young people can be more powerful and more damaging than even what we received. So I'm just wondering if you have just to start you there, and then I'm going to open the floor for everybody else. So when you want to make a comment, just use the reaction button at the bottom, raise your hand, and you're more than welcome to make your comments, and we will look forward to it. But I thought that might just give us a starting point with you, Teresa. Go ahead.
Wow, leave it to Mary Hunt to draw it down to the least common denominator here. For me, this work could not have been done had there not been antecedents in my sort of womanist way of thinking. And
Mhm.
while it is hard sometimes to even measure the successes, uh, Mary, you and Diane wrote a book some years ago that poured into my life in ways I had never, uh, you know, been nurtured before. So let me say it this way: academics, anyway, have a responsibility to write, write, write. That's one of the ways we can make a difference. The other thing I need to probably say is that we also have responsibility to talk, talk, talk. So doing what I'm doing today, the work that Monique Moultrie has done, the work that Kelly Brown Douglas has done, Katie Geneva Cannon, Emily Towns, when we take those in lump sum, we are continuously sort of eroding the mountains, right? So I don't take lightly that we've moved the ground, we've changed some things, we've caused people to open their hearts and minds. But you're right. I mean, it's getting worse. I teach a class, Race and Religion in America. I just finished the Wednesday class, and one of the clips I showed was a pastor who went in his congregation with a AK 57 or 15 something, and just walking around with it, using the gun as a prop to suggest that this is how the gospel means for us to clear a room. Well, I associate that story that he told. I mean, he's on YouTube, so you can look him up. Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. Just happened about 3 weeks ago, maybe four. So the notion that people in the pulpit are carrying these weapons is frightening to think. But I still believe in the in the security of our faith. I still believe in the fact that solidarity is not cheap. It costs you something. Solidarity with those whom you love and who you know are being unjustifiably mistreated is still a call on our lives. And so ramp it up, do more. But I cannot tell you that there is a solution that I can pinpoint that would just turn it around. I believe this is the long game. And if I had to really assess what took place with, Ida B. Wells Barnett and the whole anti-lynching piece, moving that forward, it takes years to make these kinds of things. I dated someone who drove a 18-wheeler And the point that was being made when we went out to the right in order to make a left turn was that when you're driving a really big thing, sometimes you have to go in the opposite direction to really position yourself to go in the right direction. And what does that mean for us? It means, you may have had to confront some things yourself about within the family of LGBTQ folk, what do you think? But ultimately, we have to confront what the whole world is thinking about all of us and be willing to go all the way out to the right in order to make a left turn. And what I mean by that is being said metaphorically, but I mean, you got to talk to some folks who are on the right and hate you. Got to see if there's any capacity to make friends. See if there's a relationality that can be struck. Make sure that you approach whatever it is you do in the right spirit. And yes, there's a threat. There's a threat that your very life may be completely wiped off the face of the earth. But let faith guide you. Be discerning. Move forward in wisdom and do your part.
Thank you very much. And we take your words to heart here at Water. I also want to shout out Monique Moultrie, who's with us. You mentioned her, and certainly her groundbreaking work, especially looking at Black lesbian women in the practice of ministry, among other of her tremendous forms of research, is a foundation on which we stand. And she is happily no stranger to water. We welcome you, Monique Moultrie, at any moment and look forward to further work. Let me now open the floor to those who would like to ask a question or make a comment, express a new idea, and I will simply call on people in turn. So do not be shy. Our time is limited, and we want to hear from as many as we can. Yes, Mary Jane. Mary Jane Schultes from St. Louis.
There are all kinds of things called abominations in the Hebrew scriptures, but the only one we ever hear about is homosexuality. And maybe if we talk more about other abominations, people would get the idea that this is strictly Hebrew scripture.
I like it. However, the many instances in which that happens would cause us in a lot of ways to really realize how hypocritic we are, how hypocrisy has begun to define us. And so I would say
It's good.
maybe it is. But thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mary Jane. We'll turn now to the Reverend Dr. Marie Fortune.
Thank you, Dr. Smallwood. It's a pleasure to meet you and hear about your work. As you were talking about the phenomenon of othering others, one of the things that puzzles me in our work together is part of the reason people do that is to belong to the group that others.
Mm-hmm.
And the classic example of that would be the Klan, and that there's a grouping and a identity
Mm-hmm.
to be in the group that does that to others. And that's a puzzle to me in terms of thinking about how we deconstruct that. Do you have suggestions?
You've hit the nail on the head there. I think it was trying to think of her name. Cynthia Scove Nevels wrote a book, Lynching to Belong. And what she does in that book is help us understand why people fall prey to the melting pot.
Mm.
What I have said in many instances to my classes is the melting pot is designed to melt your culture off of you, so that all that's left is whatever it is that's in the pot. My whole point in that is to suggest that when you desire to give up something in order to attain something, count up the cost. Because you have to realize that when you give up something of yourself, you're not sure what it is you're getting. In the case of lynching to belong, there were Polish folk, a few Jewish people, and a great number of people who were immigrants from other places who joined in Brazen, Texas, in the lynching of Black folk so that they could become a part of the white folk.
Right.
And all I'm very, very much, appalled to any of that, but all I'm really gaining from that is the fact that our culture has produced that kind of evil across the board.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about white privilege, but what it really is the capacity to join in to be protected. It goes all the way back to a Hobbesian versus, a Lockean understanding of how we want to organize ourselves in the world. Do we want to have autocracy where we've got a king and someone who calls the shots in exchange for the social contract that says we'll protect you? Or do we want a democracy? That's where we are even in America today. And unfortunately, as that unfolds in real time, a great number of Americans have chosen autocracy. They've chosen to give in on the issue of democracy in order to have a king, to have someone who says, I'm going to protect you, but you got to do what I tell you to do. This is the crossroads, the literal intersection. This is the place that we find ourselves even in this moment. And it's not just about LGBTQIA folk, it's about everyone. We have some determinations to make. Or Scholes Neville's thesis might just find ourselves involved as well.
Thank you for putting a fine point on it. And we need to hear it and we need to make our decisions. And this is all part of the process, which is why I'm so glad that people have joined this afternoon to discuss these matters with Dr. Teresa Smallwood here at Water. Jane Grovajon, you would be next and most welcome.
Teresa, thank you. Thank you for your work, your energy, your spirit. Hearing you crack open the word, I'm thinking about spirituality of the catacombs, right? So that history that we all have, if we stand within this tradition of Christianity, of the many, many, many peoples, plural, who endured, some survived, some didn't, persecution. And I'm struck by the enigma, the call, which is a powerful call to reject death and death-dealing theologies, death-dealing policies, laws, practices, healthcare, all of that, which also means, of course, we risk our lives, so that we have to have a willingness to embrace death at the same time. And I'm wondering if you could, and again, off the top of your head, bottom of your heart, could suggest ways of feeding ourselves in that process. Like, what are the kinds of things that you're aware of within your own tradition, across our traditions, that can feed that spirituality in us, to resist those things that kill our spirit while also being willing to embrace the possibility of our own death?
Wow. Whoa, what a beautiful question. Let us first acknowledge that if we don't experience physical death, we're always going to experience social death and social trauma. This is something that Orlando Patterson put before us, and I can't get it out of my mind. Even though he was speaking primarily of the phenomenon of enslavement, it still has a riveting effect, an ongoing effect. We can still hear the cries of those who were put on those trees. Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote a whole poem, The Haunted Oak Tree, establishing that even the tree felt the pain of that body swinging. The notion that the tree can have a response suggests to us that, listen, all of nature, all of nature is moaning and groaning, waiting for the sons and daughters of God to step up and take our place, operate in a power, not one that just says, I'm going to speak truth to power, but one that says, I'm speaking truth to power in power. And the power I'm speaking of is a spiritual power. So the effort we must make is to follow ourselves into the spiritual disciplines that afford us the power to move mountains literally, to part waters literally, to see to it that walls are not put up, but walls are taken down, to operate in such a way that the unified force of God's Holy Spirit changes the whole trajectory of humanity.
Thanks for your question, Jane, and thank you, Dr. Teresa Smallwood, for your response. It is reminding me so much of Dr. Katie Cannon of blessed memory, who helped us to lay the foundations for some of this work. I bring her to mind. Other comments, questions? I have a bunch of my own, but I'm going to let Sheila Curran from Dublin, Sister Mercy, lay out her thoughts on this. Sheila, do you want to be next? And we'll keep an eye on our time, but let's see if we can get another one or two in before we finish. Go ahead, Sheila.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smallwood, for your most passionate and groundbreaking opening. I live in a very different context to your context, but I am a Catholic, and we have this synodal process worldwide going on in the Catholic Church. And when you talked about fear and resistance, you know, anything to do with LGBTQ plus women in general has been a very contentious issue throughout the history of the Catholic Church. But it's very interesting to know that on the ground work that was done in many places, people have been speaking out about the rhetoric that you call, you know, within the Christian tradition. And even within those hierarchical circles, there are LGBTQ plus people. But because of the hierarchical, patriarchal, colonial mindsets that, you know, override the system, that it's very interesting to watch how the system takes a hold rather than the truth-telling of the membership, despite this being quite, you know, an open synod initially around hearing what people had to say. And when you're talking about how to change a system that is so ingrained and get set back, because while there would have been one or two movements that you wee kind of clinks that you thought, well, yeah, this is now going to be dealt with. One of my sisters who was at the synod in the Catholic Church was at a table whereby 5 of the bishops sitting there kept saying in their countries there was no such thing as LGBTQ plus people. And like, as she said, like, how could anybody, you know, of God in any kind of way in touch with any humanity, you know, anywhere, be able to sit so removed? And maybe some of them were LGBTQ plus people themselves and are in that mess of how, I was just interested when you talk about systems and power and rhetoric, that no matter how many prods it gets to break it open, that the resistance, that wall of resistance becomes so great that it then puts the people back you know, like people are back out of, it's still an ongoing process. I don't know what the scope is really going to do, if anything, but when people come back to saying, is it ever, ever, ever going to change? While there maybe be in a context where they hear a different message.
Mhm.
But what you're illustrating is that the systems, you know, whether you're in your context or mine, is still so powerful that even though you stand up and people say something, there's a domination of a rhetoric that's so hard to break, at least in my tradition as well, you know. But I am inspired by what you say, and certainly will, you know, recommend what you've said to some people I know, which will find it really interesting to follow your writing. So I thank you for that.
Mhm.
Thanks, Sheila. Teresa, you want to make a quick comment on that? And I can assure you, Sheila, that if I have anything to do with it, Dr. Smallwood will be back. So not to worry. Go ahead, Teresa.
I just want to say I thank you for your comment. I'm very much aware that we sound like the psalmist, how long, God? How long? And it feels as though we're playing a long game that may not even play out in our lifetimes. But I am just silly enough to believe that if you keep speaking the truth in the power that I'm talking about, a change will come. Now, I can also say to you that it can be awfully discouraging when you see people who act as though they have no concept. Those bishops, they have a concept. They know what's what. You know, in my church, for instance, it was fine as long as they were playing the music or directing the choir. So in part, what we're doing is helping to call out the hypocrisy, no doubt. We're helping people understand what it means to say that there is a truth, and not a truth that is couched in deceit, not a God talk that is really a disguise for hate talk. Once the awareness of folk opens, and we can see examples of this throughout human history, change does come. Marx suggested when all of the oppressed people join up, you got a new majority. So I have whole hope in that regard. Thank you so much.
I close by saying that water programs are free and open to everyone. Your donations, of course, are needed and welcome. It is our job to socialize the resources, and we do the best we can. Those who can donate do so generously that we always make water programs available to everyone without charge or donation. So you do not have to be a water donor to join us. You simply have to come. We believe here at Water, and we have believed this from now more than 40 years, that if we share among us, there's enough. If we share among us, there's enough. And 40 plus years later, it continues to be the case right down to today, as Teresa Smallwood has shared so generously. Among us, there's enough. So with that, I thank you again, Dr. Smallwood. I look forward to your coming back at your leisure when you have a project that you'd like to share or even like to discuss, even if it's not finished, you want to have a forum in which to discuss it. I can assure you that water people will be at your disposition, and we really are delighted that you are one of us. The Zoom will now remain open for conversation, but in the meantime, I express good day and good struggle from Water to each and to all. So Teresa, if you'd like to pick up on my comment, what do you think? I mean, does this, have we got a ray of hope here that rhetoric may affect laws and behavior, but do laws and behavior also tamp down the rhetoric? And that may be some of the success that you're pointing to. That some of the laws, especially, for example, the sigh of relief this week that the Supreme Court is not going to look at same-sex marriage again anytime soon. I mean, I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm sure others did as well. Is it because the behavior and the laws help to tamp down that rhetoric? Is that a hope we might have?
Well, I don't have hope personally. You know, I practiced law for better than 20 years. I'm sorry, Mary, but I don't have hope in law at all.
Uh-huh.
I do think it can tamp down rhetoric, but I also think laws have been precisely the messenger of some of the ways in which we have held people hostage, their humanity being mistreated. It was the Supreme Court, the same Supreme Court that said there's absolutely nothing white people owe to Black folks. It was the same concept of legislation that, you know, gave people the right to hold people in bondage. So in that sense, we've never ever been able to pass an ERA. No Equal Rights Amendment has ever been able to pass. You must ask yourself why. It's not so much that we have a law on the books as the people who make them. And so it really boils right back down to human beings and their inhumanity to other human beings. How does that change? That changes with changes of heart. You know, Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't change her alliance with our present president on the issues related to her constituency because she had a change of heart. She saw that as a threat to her own beingness, her own capacity. So we have to understand and know that it's the people. That's my response to you.
Well, you reinforced my own choice. My father wanted me to go to law school. He said someone in our family needs to get a license to steal, and that would be you. But I was happy to tell him that I really looked at something else with more interest, and that was theology and religion. And you have confirmed me in my vocation today, Dr. Smallwood, and I appreciate that. The floor is open. Marie Fortune's back again. Go right ahead, Marie.
Well, I think part of the problem at this point in time is the lawlessness. So we've relied on the law historically to pass laws that are affirming and protective of folks. But those are being taken away, but also the behavior of this administration disregards law. So that's part of what's depressing to me is that we cannot thoroughly rely on, I mean, good on the Supreme Court for not revisiting marriage, but next week they could do it. I mean, you know, we can't count on the courts to be the wall that protects from this kind of lawlessness that nobody in DC seems to want to stop.
So it is. Who else would like to make a comment before we, yeah, let's see. Teresa, I have another question, if I might. Queer biblical studies help, right? In terms of all this. How have queer biblical studies found their way into the theological curricula of, say, United Lutheran or Howard University Divinity School, your alma mater? What's happening there that, especially from Black scholars, what might we look to for queer biblical studies as a help here to begin to change some of this language? I mean, are there texts that you're telling people not to even bother with? I mean, how are, I know you're not a biblical scholar, but how are some of your biblical scholar colleagues handling some of this? Are they providing a support for you in this work?
Oh, absolutely. Let me say this. Ken Stone, who was the Bible scholar that I most looked up to during my process as a PhD student, wrote a book, Practicing Safer Texts. His idea behind that as a gay man was to take on the very seriously misappropriated and misapplied interpretations of the Bible. Now, I personally cannot point to a single Black biblical scholar that I think has taken it on in that way. But there have been a few people who have managed the Bible from a theological standpoint that I think are helpful. And clearly, you know, Kelly Brown Douglas is a starting place. She's not a biblical scholar. She is a theological or theologian, but she handles the Bible in her texts. both the one that starts out with the Black Christ and moves on into sexuality in the Black church, and even into her dealing with the specific phenomenon of the killing of Black men in Stand Your Ground. Now, there are also others who don't explicitly deal with either the Bible or theology, but deal more specifically with how the aesthetics or the culture or the concepts can be deconstructed. So there are lots and lots of folks who would make it to the bibliography, right? But I find in recent times, I still go back to my theopoetics. I still go back to Audre Lorde. I still go back to Adrienne Rich. I still go back to the folk who helped me conceive of a different approach to the biblical text. And that, I think, is still where I stand. I've got great people, Mitzi Smith doing Womanist biblical interpretation, Vanessa Lovelace doing Womanist biblical interpretation. You had her on your program before she died. Name just went right out from my head. But all of those women do serious interpretation that can supply or align with the arguments we're making. And I find, the commentaries to be very helpful. There are plenty of them. And I would suggest that if it is a biblical interpretation, start with some of the womanist works. Will Gaffney has a tremendous piece that helps us, particularly around the Old Testament and its contribution to some of the oppressions that we have felt.
Mhm. And how about your work in the public? You're in the public theology sector. Where have you seen, you mentioned in your comments that you had had a good reception with this book, and I'm just wondering where in the popular literature one might begin to find some of this. Not that it's your responsibility to put it there, but if anybody else is picking up your work and putting it in places that I think would really be helpful. I'm thinking about things like when something gets in the Christian Century as opposed to the Journal of Religion or the Harvard Theological Studies Review, or when something gets into Ms. versus the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion. I'm just wondering, especially in the Black community, if there might be popular places where this work gets disseminated, because it seems to me that it's such an important component, but to get it in the popular press as well as in the theological. Any thoughts on that?
It's a great question, but Monique will be the one to answer that. I don't know as much as she knows about how to farm your stuff out. I've seen most recently with a very good friend of mine whose book came out around about the same time, Melanie Jones Quarles. She wrote a book entitled Up Against the Crooked Gospel. Now,
Yeah,
Melanie has shown up in every social platform that I know of. She has promoted her book herself well. And I just don't have a handle on that. I wish I did, which is why I'm so honored to be at Water today. I wish I knew more about what the outlets are. I know that with Monique, she was plugged into every AAR journal. I was able to publish a review in one, but not because I knew how to get there. She knew how to get me there. And so more of that needs to be shared so people have a better understanding of how to get the word out, so to speak. But let me also say, I'm wearing cufflinks that say I'm AME. I don't think the AME church would publish any kind of review at all about this book. I could send it to the Christian Recorder, but I don't think they would publish it because the church is still in that posture. Now, I'm there because I'm there to be a resistance voice. I'm there to hold up the bloodstained banner, but I don't really expect to get much traction in terms of the book. But what they can't do is put me out because I know I got a right to be there.
I hear you. Yeah, I'm thinking of like Renita Weems, for example, who has long published her work in the popular forum rather than or in addition to in the academic. And I just think it has had such echo. I also think about people like Vera on our staff who know so much about social media, and maybe you get the ear of somebody like that that could give you some tips. Vera, I'm
That's a good point.
um,
Oh, and I know the woman I was trying to think of was Gay Byron in terms of
oh God,
Black
yes, and she
female,
passed on. Yes, that's right. And she,
Black female biblical interpretation. But I would say this: everybody can't do what Renita Weems did.
right.
Not everyone can have as long a run as she has had. I mean, from Just a Sister Away all the way up to Waiting for God, all the way through and by, and not even be in academia.
Hmm.
I mean, she survived as a public intellectual, writing books continuously, creating her own following. I'm not called to that.
Right, right. But it's a good example that
It
that's
is.
and it shows how these ideas get into the marketplace in many, many different ways. And I'm just thinking, I know with Vera and you know your generation, Vera, the use of social media is so important and so crucial. We had 2 interns last year. Of course, Vera has replaced both of them, not to mention her own competence. She's replaced both of them. But 2 interns who did so, one of whom did social media and really made a big difference in terms of both our audience and as well as our reach. And I think this is something that we need to be taking very seriously in the kind of work that we do. So you all might want to have a conversation at some point.
I
Anything
received
else before we close things out? Diane New, please, your hands up.
I want to circle back to feeding spirituality, Teresa. You mentioned it, and I was so struck by it that with the social death and the trauma, even the tree responded and felt it. And I'm so caught with the connections that we have with the cosmos, not even the earth, not even the universe, but the cosmos. I mean, the stars, the earth, that we are part of all of this. How do you feed your spirituality to keep so focused with all that you have given us today?
Thank you.
Do you have?
Thank you for that question, Diane. I am a person of nature. I've had some of my most spiritual experiences on my back porch, watching the sun come up or watching the sun go down. I love beaches. I love watching waves. I love to meditate around nature. So I'll go into the woods and just, take a chair or a blanket and sit with the trees. I know I sound crazy,
No,
but that's how I get my inspiration. That's my spiritual practice. I'm kind of like Howard Thurman. I do have a mystical aspect to me. My makeup is so much more spiritual. I really believe in what Mumu Fresh says, and you all need to Google her. Mumu Fresh did a NPR Tiny Desk concert, and in her opening piece, she sings this chorale, and then she comes out with the fact that we are all just spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah. I think Rumi said that first.
No, maybe.
Yeah.
I need to go back and read some Rumi, dude.
Sounds like it bears repeating. Anybody else here before we close things off? I don't want to take advantage of Teresa's time, and I know others have other schedules, but if there are any concluding comments, this would be the moment. Feel free.
Hearing none, may I have a concluding comment that I
More
have
than
been
welcome.
so thoroughly refreshed by you all. The fact that you even showed up means so very much to me. It is a gift, and I thank you for it.
And we thank you right back, Teresa Smallwood, and we look forward to seeing you and hearing from you and being part of your circle. I also will be sure in the notes that we mention several of those people Monique and others who have done Water Talks before, so people can circle back and see those. Gay Byron, you remind me, yes, ma'am, right down the street here at Howard University until her untimely death. You remind me of that. So thank you very much. Once again, Teresa, thank you. And everybody have a great day. Be well. Take heart. Bye-bye.